like to walk.
And we're not only that, but it's because they have animated.
Oh, the animal, I know the animals, they're excellent. They're well done.
Just gonna mention.
No, that's great. I'm glad you did. Thank you. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, here, we have to give you a name tag. You got, okay, you're on. I'm sorry, Judith is on it. My apology. Okay, we're good. She's, I don't have to worry, right? Hello? I just, so you know, actually, this is not a joke. I'm not making it up. Get her roll. We need someone downstairs. There's other.
Here, Marta.
How are you?
Perfect. Good. Why not? Better be good.
He literally has so much fun of like.
Hey, Jack, nice to see you.
For a minute. I was
You?
gonna bring you stuff. I was like, no, no, I'm not here. It's
Sorry,
springtime.
I had the next day.
You're here.
We're here.
That's it.
Yeah, we're so connected. I'm good. I'm literally so cute when he woke up in the morning. I like couldn't handle it. It was so sweet. And he's just then, you know, just he's so pure. I had so much fun at which.
Oh, I just like to buy.
I owe you later.
Yeah, with her.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was waiting. Yes, just tell me.
You just have to, I have to, tell me, give me. I know, we're always like.
Informally.
Where do you? Palmetto and Harvard. So. Okay. That helps. Right, now. Exactly. Go from meeting to meeting, we had a meeting. Sure, you're very good. Thank you. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okay, hello, everyone. Let me get to where we are today. My. Got the fun here.
Miss Judith.
Okay.
I don't understand.
Ron, are you handling the waiting room? I'm not, right? Just want to clarify.
Yeah, I am.
Okay, great, awesome, thank you.
Good morning.
Okay, so, let's see, we all here, great, I think we have one new, learner with us today, new to our, group, oh my god, that looks like a very weird. I'm just not looking at it, right, okay, we're here together, I'm not, okay, great. Awesome. That feels great, yeah, oh, good, I'm glad you could do that. So we have Lauren who's here with us, Lauren, if you'd like to, introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here. My last name is Liebman. My husband and I just joined about a few months ago. We have grown children, but they come around. Just interested in learning and meeting new people, being part of the community.
Welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
To the TV family.
Thank you.
We are thrilled that you're here.
Thank
And happy to learn together. So today we are going to explore a gift. A gift that was given to the people of Israel on the sixth day of creation. What is that gift? You can say it out loud. Shabbat. All right, pack it up. Let's head out. You guys are good. So the gift of Shabbat, and I'm using that language intentionally, okay? Before we dive into what our tradition says, because I think the creation of Shabbat and the understanding of it as a gift is a monumental moment in that has shaped the generations. We're gonna explore why and get your feedback, but what I first want you to do, and I want to invite you to do, is to think about one of your first Shabbat memories. And then I want you to tell me, in your own way, define Shabbat. So first, we're thinking about one of our first, our earliest or first Shabbat memories. And the second thing I'm gonna ask you to do is to define Shabbat in your own language. Okay? So take a few minutes. Think about that. Right, great. Who would like to start? Spencer, please.
One of my earliest, I don't know if it's very early, but early Shabbat memories is I went to Camp in Judea. Up in Connecticut, Orthodox, monarchy, and early Shabbat memories, them keeping us in. Services before breakfast for 3 or 4 hours when we're all starving, so. Yeah, so then Shabbat was, oh my God, after breakfast first thing, like every kid, but now Shabbat's a time to come together with friends and family.
Great, beautiful. Thank you. Who would like to go next? Liliana.
Growing up in Chile, I grew up not learning a lot about Judaism. My dad was into institutions. So Friday night, we would go to Maccabi and they would have Shabbat. And that's the first time that I saw Shabbat, the candle, the wine. And it was different because yes, it was part of Judaism, but it was more about way of life. And my first real Shabbats, I had it here in the States when I came like 52 years ago.
Beautiful. Thank you. Ah, okay, who's over here? Martha.
I think of Shabbat and I could see my mother at the dining room table, lighting the candles and having us over every Friday night. And I insisted, she would say to me, so what do you want this Friday? Not knowing how tedious it was in her little tiny galley kitchen to make stuffed cabbage.
Off the bat.
The best. And that's what I remember.
Nice. And how would you define Shabbat?
As being with the family.
Nice, thank you.
So I recall going to Hebrew school and having to go on Saturday morning. And being there to join, it was conservative, so joining the service at 10:40. Not earlier, never being there for the Torah service, which didn't make any sense in retrospect, but only being there for the Musaf service. And then maybe a little snack. And I define it now as doing something out of the ordinary for the week. And it doesn't really matter what you're doing, but don't do the same thing that you do during the week.
Lovely. I love that. Robin.
So I don't really have like a memory because I didn't really grow up with much Judaism. But in my early 20s, I made a friend who was kind of religious. And he took me to his synagogue and for Shabbat, and it was amazing. And it meant to me a way to connect with the divine, with the community, and it still is that for me today.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, so I grew up secular, so I don't have any Shabbat memories. From my childhood, just from when I was an adult. And to me, Shabbat is about being a holy day, a sacred space, a sacred time.
Lovely, thank you. Rashina.
So I also grew up going to a summer camp, and I think what clicked for me there in those early years was the idea of like our calendar starting in the evening. So like that Friday night service held a lot for me, even more so than Saturday, just this idea of coming together. And I think Saturday at summer camp, what was different was that you had choice and freedom, and there was like an unstructured day, which was very different from the rest of the week. So I think those two elements like still hold true for me now. Having had services outside in summer camp, in the summertime, I connect to this idea of more like physically and spiritually.
Beautiful. What? What?
I connect to what you're saying. Shabbat to me means warmth and celebration. My earliest memories, and I grew up secular. My earliest Shabbat memories involve going to bar mitzvahs, bar mitzvahs. And just celebration, dressing up, elevating whatever I was doing, being on my best self. And I raised my children at a conservative day school. So then Shabbat meant play and football and not going in the car. And just a different day, quiet day, in some ways noisy in others, but it's friendship, family affection.
Yeah. Lovely. We're describing an early Shabbat memory and how we would define Shabbat today in our own words. Anyone else want to share? Please, Judith.
I have no memories at all. 4 generations Jewish. Never celebrated the holiday, never really celebrated who we were, never went to temple. And I just did that as an adult myself. And then I never put emphasis on Shabbat, even when I had at home with children. I did not put emphasis on Shabbat. Sad, very sad.
Thanks for sharing that. Any other?
I said I missed it. I missed a lot because we never had Shabbat and I never did it for my kids. My kids went to Jewish summer camp and I'm sure they have
Yeah.
wonderful memories, but I don't.
Yeah.
Missed out.
Linda.
Now, I also, when I was growing up, I don't remember doing anything, but I got my kids involved very early. So we always had Shabbat dinners. But as an adult now, without kids, I make sure I don't do anything that I do during the week on Shabbat. So no errands. I cheat and I do talk on the telephone.
I cheat.
But my son became religious, so don't take it to that extreme. But yeah, I just try to have a chill day.
Nice. Anyone online want to share? I don't know if I missed any hands. Good. Okay, any other last minute? Oh, yeah, please, go ahead.
I was Orthodox at one time during my teenage years and my family wasn't, but sometimes I would go to synagogue, an Orthodox synagogue, and in the afternoon during the meal between Mincha and Ma'ariv, they would sing a lot of songs and I have a lot of good memories of that together.
Beautiful. Beautiful, thank you. So thank you all for sharing. So some of the things I wanted to highlight. So some of the words that we use were keeping Shabbat, having Shabbat. Watching someone engage in something. So your mother bringing in, lighting the candles, wanting everyone to be together. I have to, okay? Doing something out of the ordinary, connection, sacred space and sacred time. We talked a little bit about time, starting in the evening, nighttime, celebration, a sense of quiet, elevating, and singing. So those are some interesting, beautiful words and sentiments that we're going to carry with us as we talk about Shabbat itself. We're going to talk about from the very beginning that Shabbat is understood to have been an element of creation. God creates this specific time that we understand as Shabbat. And in so doing, God also creates this notion of rest. So God is creating sacred time. God is creating rest within this particular space. And then God sort of grants us the opportunity to engage in the same behavior that God engages in, which is this notion of rest on this specific day and time. And over time, and as we as a people have evolved and grown, those customs, those traditions have evolved, and there are similar elements and rituals that all of us participate in, and then there are others that we maybe do a little bit differently. But the hope is, and the intention is that we are carving out time and space to recognize that this particular moment is distinct, is different than the other moments that we live in the week, and the other times that we live in the week. So we're going to look at the text and understand what is the text teaching us about Shabbat. And then we are going to focus a lot of our additional texts outside of Torah on the teachings of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, because his work, The Sabbath, is one of those critical pieces of text that I personally find a tremendous amount of insight and attachment and beauty in, but also he focuses also so much of his theology, his perspective on the notion of the Sabbath, and what is he trying to teach us, and how does that connect with the Torahitic text that we'll be reading today. So the first thing I wanted us to start with is from Babylonian Talmud, and this is what it teaches: that ye may know I am the Lord who sanctify you, the Holy One, blessed be God, said unto Moses, Moses, I have a precious gift in my treasury, and its name is Sabbath. I wish to give it to Israel. Go and tell them. So from the Talmud's perspective, right, the Talmud here is saying this is something that's precious, and it's discussed as a gift in my treasury, in my treasure box, and this amazing trove of goodness that I, God, have. I'm going to reach inside of it. I'm going to give this gift to you, my people, and it's precious. A precious gift that I give to you, and it even has a name, and the name is Sabbath. Now, Moses, go and tell the people of Israel about this precious gift. And so in the Torah, the first time that we hear about this gift, right, from the very beginning, Vayachulu hashamayim v'ha'aretz v'chol tzeva'am, and the skies and the earth and all their array were finished. And in the seventh day, God finished God's work that God had done and ceased in the seventh day from all the work that God had been doing. God blessed the seventh day, made it holy, because God ceased in it from doing all God's work, which God had created. Okay, so if we look here in Gimel, Vayvarech Elohim et Yom HaShvi'i vaykadesh oto kivo Shabbat mikol melachto. God ceased on this day from doing all the work that God had done and created this time, this moment, and sanctified it as holy. So many of the words that all of you use are very similar to here, right? This notion of keeping a particular time and space, of having to engage in something because it is holy, right? And this elevation of holiness in the sacred. And the recognition that the work that God had been doing, and now all of a sudden, on this seventh day, God ceases, meaning now God is no longer engaged in all the other work that God had done in those previous days ahead of time, and now God is resting, which is now something new we never knew from rest before. This notion of ceasing and resting, we've not known it, now all of a sudden that too is being created, which is an amazing thing if you think about it, if we think about rest as having to be something that we have to create. If you think about your days in a week, okay, Monday through Friday, how often do you rest?
Well, we're retired.
Okay. Hey, but you know what? It's also not necessarily like a foreign concept even, right? You may not be going to an office, but you're pretty busy.
Well, I remember when my kids were little, we lived in Pennsylvania, and Sunday was a day of rest. No stores were open. I
Right.
don't know if anybody else. Yeah, no stores were open, and you were almost, forced to stay home with your family.
Right.
And in a way, there were no activities and you had to be home, which
Right.
was like, like a Shabbat, but then capitalism took over and stores were open and life went on 7 days a week, so.
Right, right, which is something that we have to contend with in our day, right? Yeah, Maddie.
I think in our culture, there's like a no-no, a taboo if you're not productive.
Sure.
But as I've evolved, certainly as a retired person, and as someone, I do a lot of yoga. I had to learn to do nothing.
Yeah.
And it, it's told to me in many ways how it's just as important as being productive and constructive. So, just sitting is so unnatural for me because I feel like I have to be moving or there's a list and I gotta get to the next item.
Right, 100%, right? I think you've totally hit on this, and I think one of the things that I love about this passage, right, is that it lines up everything that God had done. God created an entire world, right? God was pretty busy for those 6 days, right? Constantly productive, doing, creating, whatever. And in our own lives, and whatever that looks like, whether it's work, whether it's, creating a new life in the next chapter of our lives, right? This need to feel like we have to create all the time, create productivity, create lists, do the list, create what the menu for dinners for this week, which is like literally my work, like the least favorite activity in the world. Right? And feeling like if we're not running, if we're not doing, then we are not productive people, and you're lazy, and we should be doing a million other things.
Can I add?
Yeah.
It's very cultural because when I moved here, I felt that they plug you in the morning and they unplug you at night. And the Latin way, even that we produce, but we take the time. We take the time to be with family, with friends, with rest. If we wanna take a nap, so it's more the American way that you have to go. There's never a time to rest.
Right, so definitely it's cultural, okay, Spencer?
I think to the culture element and to what Maddie said, I go to Lynn, which has a lot of Jews. And half the people at my school paper are Jewish, but we still work all the way through Shabbat on editing the paper to get it ready to print on Monday. And if I said no to that, yes, they'd allow it, but I don't think I'd be treated the same. Now, personally, I'm more than happy to do the work. I get bored if I spend 10 minutes not doing something. I'll eventually learn to be calm when I retire, if ever. But, yeah, I feel like in American society, even in Boca Raton, even in a fairly Jewish place, it's not always welcome to take Shabbat off. But taking off Friday nights if someone needs me is gonna be an inconvenience to them. I still wanna be here and I'm still gonna push, but just taking a few hours out of the day and not being available is a problem.
Interesting perspective.
So I practiced law for 48 years, and I could count on the number of, on one hand, the number of Saturdays I ever worked at the office. I played a game with everybody by figuring out how I could stay late, come in early, work as hard as whatever, do it on Sunday nights at home, whatever. And nobody really realized ever that I really wasn't coming in on Saturdays. I mean, I did it a couple times, I may have had to work at home, but I think and the reason for it was not that I wanted to honor Shabbat, but I really felt that if I didn't take that day, I was definitely not as productive for the next week. Because when I started, I had to do it, and I said, by Thursday, I was pissed.
Yeah.
And I think you just needed that time off.
Yeah.
To do something else, and we did it with the family.
Yeah.
Years ago, I came across a phrase that stuck with me, and it was the illusion of busyness. And how we don't feel productive unless we're busy, but we may not be doing something productive. And now we have all these self-help ways and websites to help us calm down. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
What we've come to.
Beautiful, Rashina, and then Jack.
So what's interesting about this, well, this whole notion of rest is this idea here at least, like, that you have to finish all your work first before you rest. Which is really interesting, like, so it's an example of rest, but. And like how you were saying, like you carved out this like time or whatever, and we do that with Shabbat, but it's a different thing than what Liliana is talking about, which is a part of your day, your everyday, when the work is not done. So I'm curious to know like what Judaism, like, you know, a part of every day, I think the blessings that left down and the acknowledgement, the connection to things, but in terms of this, if you read the sentence, it's like, he finished it after it was all done, you know,
Right.
after all this work was done, then he rested.
Right. So I think that's really interesting. I think, you know, the idea of Shabbat being this day that is going to be separate from everything else is like is that big model of what it means to release ourselves from all that binds us in the rest of the week and to carve out intentional time and space that is holy. And in addition to, we also talk about kavanah, the intentionality of how we live our lives, which integrates other aspects of what it means that we can carve out small moments in the regular part of our day as holy or sacred. And that's through the notion of blessing, the notion of offering our prayer 3 times a day, that we carve out these special moments in order to allow ourselves to sort of recalibrate, refocus, to understand what is important, to know that each and everything that we do has significance and that we show gratitude. Whereas Shabbat being this gift, if we think about it from what the tradition teaches, the Shabbat being a gift, the gift that we grant ourselves each and every week takes a little bit more effort than those other little moments in time that we can take for the rest of our lives, but that it comes every week, right? This isn't the once a year festival or something that we are constantly seeking that comes so much later. Oh, in 6 months, I'll be able to rest, right? I'll be able to have Shabbat. No, it's every week, every single week we are given this gift again. What's interesting about Shabbat too is that our prayers shift, the Amidah shifts, it changes for Shabbat. During the week, we ask for things, right? There are these supplicatory prayers. We ask for things of God. On Shabbat, we don't. On Shabbat, we just acknowledge and we are grateful. We are grateful for all these things that we have. I'm not asking for anything on Shabbat. Because what else? God too is rested, right? So the acknowledgement that on Shabbat, we have this opportunity to not just engage in the same language of prayer that we recite during the week. On Shabbat, our liturgy shifts and changes, also as an acknowledgement that this is a special particular moment in time and day of the week that we are grateful. We're also grateful that you, God, created this sense of rest, that we are obligated to keep and honor the Shabbat through this in a specific way, that our actions are supposed to be different than the normal week. I'm gonna move ahead a little bit. So let's do this. Let's look at the first quote from Heschel. To gain control of the world of space. So right now I want you to keep in mind space and time. To gain control of the world of space is certainly one of our tasks. The danger begins when in gaining power in the realm of space, we forfeit all aspirations in the realm of time. There is a realm of time where the goal is not to have, but to be, not to own, but to give, not to control, but to share, not to subdue, but to be in accord. Life goes wrong when the control of space, the acquisition of things of space, becomes our sole concern. So what is Heschel saying here in relation to Shabbat and this notion of space and time? What's your takeaway here from Heschel?
Material things are one thing, And, you know, we all work to gain them, I think everyone in this room at some point worked to gain them. But, you know, you gotta take time to be grateful and to recognize that, you know, you gotta live in a core with people who don't necessarily agree with or who don't have things. You've gotta be generous and donate your time to charity or whatever, so that you're able to give back. That is not just about building for yourself and the ones you like, but also for acknowledging everyone and being at peace with everyone, helping.
Very nice. What else? What else is this?
I have a question.
Okay,
When is this written?
let me look up the exact date. I don't wanna say that date. Okay. I think it's in the 60s, but I just wanna make sure I tell you the right date.
Oh, yeah, Teresa. It's very interesting. Specials 20 century. Specials 20 century. Mm-hmm.
1951,
Oh, yes, is that?
published in 1951.
And he was, Orthodox, conservative?
Well, he had Orthodox roots, but he is, you know, he was someone who was part of many different, like he taught in many different seminaries and different movements, but he was,
So he didn't identify with anything?
I'm gonna tell you. Exactly,
Stands favored.
yeah, he is,
That's for sure.
for sure. But go ahead and ask what's your question while I give you the, what was your question?
Yeah.
Who else has something?
Because it's interesting that it's like,
I
what,
didn't have.
70 years old?
Mm-hmm, And it's still true.
So relevant to today.
mm-hmm. And what resonates for you today? What are your big takeaways from it?
That you can't go all the time, and you need to take time to just take everything in and see how you can take everything in and give back in some way, but I identify it really with the day of, not necessarily a lifestyle choice. So when it says stuff like not to own, but to give, it's like giving back to God on that day. Or not to control, but to share whatever's going on with you with God that day.
Beautiful.
I see it as a reminder that we need to put balance in our life. If this was during the early 50s, then we were in a boom, an industrial boom and a financial boom. You know, the country was growing. It was right after World War II. So, you know, people were getting houses and there were new things coming. It was a tremendous amount of change. And as a result, people were very self-focused. But
It's scary time then too, though, that's McCarthyism.
yeah, and also we hid under the desks when they had a drill.
So I think, so for Heschel, who is from Poland, and he's actually brought to the United States, as a result of the president of Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, which is the Reform Seminary. Although he's a, you know, Orthodox background but he was brought to the United States to be able to teach and be part of HUC as a way to flee not the Nazis in Poland. And then he becomes obviously one of the most prominent Jewish theologians, philosophers of, I mean, still to this day, I mean, one of the things that's amazing about his work is that his work resonates still so strongly, as you point out, Linda. One of the things that I love about what he talks about with the Sabbath is he talks about the Sabbath in terms of time and space, right? Which is something that aspirationally for all of us is how do we reconcile and understand what is the realm of time, what is the realm of space? How do those things, how do we differentiate them, and where in our regular day are we in need of living within which realm, whether it's the realm of space, the realm of time? How do we attach ourselves to those two spaces, and what do those mean to us? And I think also for Heschel, he's trying to say that our goal is not just only to have, right? He's not saying don't have, right? But the goal is that there is a realm of time, the Sabbath is that time, where we need to shift our focus from not just having, but to being. And what does it mean to be and be present at this particular moment in time that is sacred? What does it mean to give, not just physically to give, but also to give spiritually? Not just to control, right? Because during the rest of our week, we're in constant, the hectic nature of what it means to constantly control time and space, but to live with this sense of balance, live in some sort of accord with time and with space. I want to share this piece. Shabbat comes with its own holiness. We enter not simply a day, but an atmosphere. Same kind of an idea, time and space. We don't just enter a day, but Shabbat is an entire atmosphere. It's an entire world into itself. He writes, my father cites, this is Heschel, cites that the Zohar, which is the mystical tradition, the Kabbalistic tradition, that the Sabbath is the actual name of God. We are within the Sabbath rather than the Sabbath being within us. For my father, he says, the question is how to perceive that holiness. Not how much to observe, but how to observe. This is the piece that I want us to think about really critically. Not how much to observe, but how to observe. Strict adherence to the laws regulating Sabbath observance doesn't suffice. The goal is creating the Sabbath as a foretaste of paradise, the world to come, Olam Haba. The Sabbath is a metaphor for paradise and a testimony to God's presence. In our prayers, we anticipate a messianic era that will be a Sabbath, and each Shabbat prepares us for that experience. So we shouldn't be so focused on how much to observe, but rather how to observe. And that's a gift that I want to give all of you today. When you think about your own Sabbath experience, that's one of the reasons why I asked you at the beginning, a Shabbat memory, or how do you define Shabbat? One of the things I hear so often is there is no possibility in which by Friday night, I can have a 5-course meal prepared for my family. We're just lucky to get to Friday all in one piece. How on earth am I supposed to observe Shabbat when it requires us to do a big dinner, all these rituals, get to temple, I'm overwhelmed by the thought of it. This to me from Heschel is so profound. It's not how much to observe, but rather how to observe. What does that mean for each and every one of us? What does Shabbat actually mean? What does Shabbat look like? And you know what? If Shabbat is the best we can do this Shabbat is we ordered in, but we're all there together and we're sitting around the table, and that is different than the rest of the week because nobody gets home at the same time and everyone's doing 8 million things. But on Friday, we made it to the table all together. Shabbat.
Sounds like a compromise.
Well, but it's balance, right? It's not about how much to observe, but how to observe. If we sit around that table, and we sit at the table every day, but at this particular night, we ask everyone a poignant question. Not maybe, did you learn something, but rather, what did you learn this week? Or how did you make a difference this week? Or what in your life, what are you thinking about this week than last week. All of a sudden, we've elevated that experience of Friday evening to a place of holiness, of sacredness, sacred living, that is different than any other day in the week. Maybe it's Saturday morning, you decide, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna just sit outside for 10 minutes and listen to the birds chirp. What we're doing is, we are recognizing that we are within the Sabbath rather than the Sabbath being within us, that we are saying, I am soulfully engaging with this time. That is different than every other day of the week where I get up and I've got to run out the door to this appointment or to that place or to that lunch or to that class. That on this day, we wake up and we say, oh, this is the day that I'm just gonna sit quietly and I'm not gonna feel bad about it. Yeah.
I love what you're saying. I feel like it's becoming more comfortable with not having control of everything. But at the same time, I feel very uncomfortable with the last sentence on there. We anticipate a messianic era. It's almost like that contradicts what you're saying and the idea of Shabbat being always present. So I have a real issue with the last word, the last sentence, but everything else comes together for me.
Yeah, right, so this idea of the messianic time, messianic era, right, for some of us, it may not be a comfortable, or what is that, or why is that important, are we always constantly striving for Olam Haba, for the world to come, why are we focus on here? Totally understand that. What we can take from this too, though, is what is the messianic era? It's a time of peace. Time of, that we usher in this notion of no more war, or tranquility. It's not a bad thing to hope and be looking forward to a time in which there will be peace on this earth. We can understand it that way. We can also understand that that is our hope, that each and every week we have the ability to invite a sense of peace and tranquility into our lives. Almost as a, some would say as a practice session for Olam Haba, but we can look at it as, no, I'm not practicing for something that will be, but I'm trying to be as intentional about what I am now. And who I hope to become from this week to the next week, right? Maybe this week I do one small thing in anticipation that next week I really enjoyed that ritual and I'm gonna extend it a little bit longer, right? So we could also see it in that way as well. Unless one learns how to relish the taste of the Sabbath, and I love this because it's also the sensory piece too, right? Unless one learns how to relish the taste of Sabbath, one will be unable to enjoy the taste of eternity in the world to come. It was on the seventh day that God gave the world a soul. Remember how we talked about humanity comes to life, that moment in time with the creation of man, where man is given that soul, that nishmat chaya. And the survival depends on the holiness of the seventh day. The task, he writes, becomes how to convert time into eternity, how to fill our time with spirit. 6 days a week, we wrestle with the world, wringing profit from the earth. On the Sabbath, we especially care for the seed of eternity planted in the soul. The world has our hands, but our soul belongs to someone else. So this idea that not just was humanity given a soul, but that God gives the world a soul through this gift of the Sabbath. And our tradition teaches us that each and every one of us are granted a second soul on Shabbat. From the Kabbalistic perspective, that's also why we have Havdalah. Havdalah is this ceremony that's created to help us deal with the separation from that second soul, because our second soul departs after Shabbat. So on Shabbat, we're granted the second soul, this difference within ourselves. And then on Saturday night, that soul departs and we await its return for the next week. So we needed a ritual to help us deal with that separation, not just the separation of the day, but the separation of that additional soul. So the notion that Shabbat in and of itself is the soul of the world. And through that world becomes a spiritual entity in and of itself by being granted this additional aspect. What does that sound like to you? How does that resonate?
I think it needs a little more clarification on second soul, what it actually was speaking about.
For us as human beings, you mean? So from the mystics of, everyone here been to Spot in Israel? So Spot is this tiny, beautiful little mystical town in the north of Israel. It's there in the 16th century that Kabbalat Shabbat is really created with the mystics of our tradition, that they created these rituals of what it means to actually go out into the fields, dressed in all white, and to receive the Sabbath bride. That we are mimicking that intimate relationship between the Sabbath being this bride and the people of Israel are the groom, right? So there's this beautiful imagery of a lot of betrothal, of wedding, of intimacy between two partners, that's how we understand the Sabbath, of Shabbat coming into our lives. So we go out into the fields, we welcome that Sabbath is bringing to us this gift of an additional soul. What does that mean? It means that each and every day we are granted, like we learned in our prayers, Eloheinu Shema Shana Tatabi, each and every day we're granted this soul. It makes us who we are, our essence of who we are. So on Shabbat, something different happens to us. We're granted the ability of having two souls, this soulful Shabbat element to us. There is something different. We have received something. You could say we've received Shabbat into our life, and so we've been granted this benefit of an additional soul that we know is with us for only 24 hours.
Is this soul God? I mean, what is this?
It's Shabbat. It can be divine. It can be God. It can be just the understanding that something additional is elevating who we are as a person, knowing that we are entering into a sacred space and time that is different from every other time in our week. And so this is this gift that arrives for us. According to here, the world has a soul, Shabbat is that additional soul, that's the Shabbat soul that we are given. So it's like a Sabbath soul that we are given, okay? Which is, I think in many ways, like just like a beautiful concept that reminds us that we in and of ourselves are different this day. Not just our engagement with the day, our behavior or our actions or our rest, but actually we are different each and every week because we are granted the benefit and the gift of this Sabbath soul that we only have for a certain amount of time. And yet we look forward to gaining again in the week to come. And so we receive that soul through that Kabbalat Shabbat, the receiving of Shabbat and the receiving of that additional soul. Did someone have a question?
I'm trying to also get it, would you call it a spiritual infusion?
Yeah, a soulful infusion, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah, a spiritual soulful infusion.
And because we're resting, we can contemplate it, we can savor it, we can let it roll, like food, you let it roll around your tongue.
Yeah.
You let it roll around your being because we are dedicating that day to rest and maybe even contemplation.
For sure, absolutely. So our prayers are different. Our understanding of the day is that it's different than the other days in the week. We are different because of this soulful infusion that we've been given, this spiritual infusion that we've been granted. And our words change from asking to gratitude, to being thankful. There's also this additional element, right? We have 2 Shabbat candles that we're to light, 2 souls that we are granted, 2 chalot. We're supposed to technically have 2 challahs on our table because of the double portion of manna that was given on Shabbat in the Torah, right? So every day we're given manna during the week, the food that came from the heavens. On Shabbat, a double portion is collected, so we don't have to go out and get it on Shabbat morning, like receive something falling because God's resting, no work. So a double portion fell, and then we'd have enough food for the 24 hours. So the 2 chalot on our Shabbos table are symbolic of that double portion that we received in the Torah. So this notion of 2s is also very interesting. That ritually we see throughout our throughout our Shabbat. Now, what's interesting is we get the 2 souls on Friday. The Havdalah candle, though, is 1 candle, but made up of different candles that are woven. So that idea that we start out with these 2 individual souls, but by Friday night, they intertwine those special elements into 1 soul yet again. And we have that 1 soul, but it remembers that intertwining of that beauty, of that soulfulness, that spiritual infusion, which I love. Which then allows us to look forward to the next Shabbat that is just down the road.
What is the smell? The smelling
The
thing?
besamim, the spices.
I haven't been to Abdallah, but what is it?
So we have different elements for Havdalah, right? We have the besamim, which are the spices. You smell that. That's another way of sort of, all of these elements to sort of like just technically, quote unquote, distract you from the idea that we are separating from Shabbat. We are leaving this time of rest, of beauty, of gratitude. So we start out with the smells. And then we have the kiddush, the wine, right? The grape, that sanctity that we're sanctifying the moment. We have the braided candle that we light, right? That those 2 individual candles now have become 1. And then we just extinguish the flame in the wine so that we notice that now, as we extinguish that flame, we recognize that Shabbat has now departed and we are now in the rest of the week. So it's this whole ritual element to separate us from one space and time into the next, from the holy to now the mundane. And yet we need these rituals in order to physically get us there. Okay. So Heschel also reinforces the message from the Talmud that the Sabbath is the most precious present mankind has received from the treasure house of God. All week we think the spirit is too far away. We succumb to spiritual absenteeism, or at best we pray, send us a little of thy spirit. On the Sabbath, the spirit stands and pleads, accept all excellence from me. Right? The Sabbath is the presence of God in the world, open to the soul of man. God is not in things of space, but in moments of time. So if we think about our course in and of itself, of thinking about monumental moments that shape the generations, right? The Sabbath and the creation of the Sabbath and this time of holiness, it's not just that this event happens each and every week, but rather it is, in many ways, it's like a stopping point each and every week that we have to stop and we have to say, wait a second. It's not just about things in space, but rather this sense of divinity, of holiness, of spirituality is in moments of time. And I have the ability each and every week to stop and pause and actually express wonder, awe, gratitude, because this day actually forces me to confront those things in a really substantial way. It's not just enough to say, okay, here we are, we're coming to temple, we're gonna say some prayers and that's Shabbat and I'll see you later, right? But even the service itself causes us to pause and consider and reflect, right? Just if we think about the liturgical elements of the service, that we're singing, we're lighting, we're sipping the wine, we're eating challah, we're reciting words of oneness, of love, of exclaiming our gratitude, of freedom, of having that opportunity at the Amidah to stand open and vulnerable before God in our own personal prayer, then silent meditation. But if you think about all the different elements of the service itself, it's asking us to do so much of what Shabbat is asking us to do. To actually recognize that there is so much that happens to us in the everyday moments of our lives and during the week, that a lot of the time, oftentimes we don't carve out the time to actually say, wow, or, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful, or look what I've accomplished, or look what I need to do. Wait a minute, I want to do something different. I want to be different in this way. I want to do better in that way. Shabbat forces us in many ways to say, stop. Rest. Rest your mind, rest your body, rest your, all of your doing, rest your prayers of want. For just a moment. And actually stop and pause and consider. That. What we have to give, what we are with the opportunities that we are given. How can we actually just express that we have the ability to enter the realm of the holy and the spiritual and the sacred, and we have time that's already carved out for us. We don't have to try to carve it out like in the rest of the week. We know it's coming. So how do we spiritually prepare for the time that's upon us, that's coming? That's Shabbat, this gift that we've been given. We think about it as a gift and not just a holiday. How does that change for you?
It actually gives you permission to enjoy Shabbat. And I think that if you have a laundry list of things to do during the week, and if you can check all those boxes, then when Shabbat comes, you can go,
Yes.
I can enjoy it.
Okay, I want everyone to sit up for just a second. And I want you to do this. Take a deep breath in. And I want you to take an audible breath out when you're ready. I want you to do it again. Breathe in. Audible breath out. That is the gift of Shabbat. We think about the work of creation. That's the breath in. Everything's your shoulders are up. And then all of a sudden Shabbat comes and your shoulders release, your body releases, your body sinks down. There's a difference in the way that we experience the rest of our lives, the everyday of our lives. The Sabbath is that release. That opportunity to actually release ourselves from the work, from the burdens, from the busy, from the chaos, from the to-do list, from the work. And Shabbat is the gift of breath, the gift of the soul, the gift of a moment in time, however long that moment is for you. Okay? Whether it's just Friday night, whether it's Saturday morning, whether it's Saturday afternoon, whatever that is. What I'm hoping that you gain from today is thinking about Shabbat as that gift that has transformed the generations, and the gift of breath, the gift of soul, the gift of rest, and the gift of acknowledging that there is time in our lives that is devoted and carved out for the sacred. That is the Sabbath. The Chad Ha'am says that more than the Jews have kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jews, right? It's more than keeping something. It's more than having to do something. It's so much more than having to go somewhere. It's so much more than an action item, right? Shabbat is what's keeping us sane. Shabbat is keeping us connected. Shabbat is keeping us in community. Shabbat is keeping us soulfully connected. And so what we have the ability to do is to receive that gift and think of it as the gift that's coming to you every week. You have the option and the ability to choose how you receive it and how you engage with it. And whatever that looks like, create that ritual, because Shabbat is a gift. It's a gift that has transformed our people and the generations. Shabbat is the opportunity for you to connect even deeper to who you are, to that still small voice, to that soul that we're granted, that additional soul. This week, as Shabbat approaches in just a few days, because it comes every week, I want you to think about just one way that you will attach yourself to Shabbat differently than you've done before. I want you to create a new Shabbat memory. So that the next time I ask you, what is your Shabbat memory? You'll share with me something different than you shared today. Something that you yourself are going to engage with. A way in which you're going to receive the gift, engage with the gift, and then share that gift with all of us. And so when we say Shabbat Shalom this week, we are truly thinking about Shabbat in a different way, not just as a day, but as a gift and as a moment in time that is going to transform who we are, who we hope to become. Okay? An early Shabbat Shalom to all of you. Okay.